which parts of me are the aspects, because it's, you know, you hear like, well, aspects, and we're not entirely sure what that is. So to get a much better understanding of that, I'm going to quickly run through what happens in the moment we experience trauma. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into it, but if you'd like to get a more deeper understanding, my YouTube channel, I do have a video, What is Trauma? You can watch that. So in the moment of trauma, what actually happens? Let's say if I was to give you a scenario in our childhood, trauma isn't only when really big things happen. We tend to think of trauma as like when we're in a car crash or sexual abuse or death in the family or something. Trauma itself is distress without resolve. So if there's a moment where you would experience distress without any resolution, what happens is your survival mind kicks in that moment. And what it does is it creates a split in your consciousness. Now, this happens much more than you would think it does. So I've actually, this time I'm prepared and I've got a bit of a diagram. So think of consciousness as like a river, and this would be the river. And what it does is it creates a split in the consciousness, like a split in the river. And then what happens is it creates these aspects. So you have this split, and these are the aspects. Now, each of these aspects have their own needs, wants, and desires. Now, we grow up as a relationally dependent species. That means we actually rely on relationships and love and connection for survival. That's why love is pretty much what it is, and that's why like our caregivers love us so much. It's actually part of our biological survival. So an infant on their own would 100% die, or every single time, if they were left on their own. The human species is actually terrible in terms of being able to survive on their own when we're born. For example, a horse, after they're born, 20 minutes later, gets up and starts walking around. Humans use connection, love, and relationships in order to survive. So we are biologically built that when these things are taken away from us, we feel annihilation, we feel death. So that makes our caregivers the gods of our reality. So if the gods of our reality are being a specific way, that will make us feel a specific way. So if you had an experience, so I'm going to give an example. Let's say when you were a child, you created a piece of art. Let's say that art would be just a picture or something. Or it could be like a video that you've made, even when like you're a little bit older. It could be absolutely anything. And let's say you take this art to your caregivers and you show it to them, and their response is something, whether it was like a bad time that they weren't really going through good stuff or anything, but their response was made you feel shame. So if they responded in a way to be like, oh, all right, yeah, no, all right, forget it. All right, I just don't have time right now, or, you know, or something like that. And that made you feel ashamed. And sometimes you may even get scolded for that. Sometimes you may create something and be like, oh, did you use the paint? Why did you use the paint? Oh my God, like I was saving that paint, and you got told off for it. Now, in that moment, it's the distress. And in that moment, your survival mind kicks in and creates the two aspects. Now, this is what the God of my reality is saying. So that's why my survival kicks in. And that split occurs. Now, everyone has multiple personality disorder. Every single person. And that's what these aspects are. We only call it a multiple personality disorder when it's really out of control. Now, these aspects have different wants, needs, and desires. So in that example that I gave, one aspect would be feeling the shame. That aspect would also feel sad, feel betrayed in that moment, and feel like they're a failure. This is the aspect that created the art. So this is the aspect of you, the part of you, the artistic expressional part of you that created that art. This is the aspect that needs that love, that needs that validation for the art. That's one aspect in the split. The other aspect, like I said, they have their own needs, wants, and desires. They're different personalities. Acts like it's not that important. So, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Plays along with everyone else. If, let's say, if they were in a position where everyone started laughing and making fun of them, that aspect plays along with everyone else. And that aspect actually stops you from doing it again. That aspect has now learnt that if I express my artistic talent like this, we're made to feel shame. So I have adopted the learnings I've learnt in this moment not to do that, not to put us in that place again. So this stops the possibility of feeling that shame again. And that aspect is the one that won't let you be vulnerable in doing things like that, because that aspect has learned that if you're vulnerable and you show this artistic side of yourself, this part of yourself, then you're going to feel shame. You're going to feel that disconnect from the God of your reality, which makes you feel annihilation. Now, what we do in the moment of that split is we will take on whatever aspect keeps us safe. So out of these two, the one that's going to keep us safe isn't the one that's feeling shame and feels sad, the one that had the artistic expression, the one that feels betrayed. It's the one that can just get on with it, that can just joke with everyone, that will stop me from being vulnerable and put myself in that position where I feel that annihilation again. So that aspect keeps me safe the quickest way possible. So what I do in that moment is I take that aspect on, and the one that feels shame and sad and everything, I put somewhere I don't have access to because I don't want to feel that shame, which is my subconscious. So in that moment, I've experienced what falls in the definition of trauma. I've split my consciousness. I've taken the aspect on that's going to keep me safe, and I put that other aspect there. Now, this aspect actually becomes part of my personality. So the reason why I'm not comfortable being vulnerable, and maybe I don't want to put my artistic expression out there in the world. Maybe people say to me, oh, you're really good at art and you should put it on social media, but I don't feel comfortable. And every time I'm going to, I feel the anxiety, I feel the shame. It's because that aspect is still within me. That aspect is still there, protecting me the way that it's learned how to protect me. The aspect that carries the shame, that feels sad, that feels betrayed, feels like a failure, that's the one that's in the subconscious. Remember, we don't have access to the subconscious. So in a moment where I might think, oh, I'm going to put my artistic expression out there, that aspect starts feeling that shame again. And this other aspect that keeps me safe stops me from doing it. And that's why I feel like that. Because every time I would do anything in terms of, okay, well, I'm going to create some art, and maybe someone might be walking past me and look at it, that would trigger that aspect in my subconscious to flare up. Now, these two aspects are still there. Time doesn't take it away. It's not like, oh, just after a bit of time, time actually, all it does is gets me really good to not listen to that aspect, to not feel necessarily all the time what it's feeling, and only feel it when I'm doing the artistic expression. Now, we still live in the emotional dark ages, and 90% of the families that live in this on this planet fall in the category of dysfunctional. That's because we live in the emotional dark ages, and when we don't have caregivers there that can be there for us emotionally, we will have many of these experiences that create these splits in our consciousness, that then we deny and reject an aspect of ourselves. The reason we deny and reject that aspect of ourselves is because our main driver is to maintain that connection with our caregiver. So if our caregiver sees something that we've created and shames us for it, then I have to deny that part of myself to maintain this connection with the caregiver, because this connection means survival to me. Because if I don't have this connection, I feel annihilation, I feel death biologically. So I have to do whatever I can to survive. And this is why your survival mind kicks in. Now, this is mainly, obviously, from the mainstream parenting technique that we have currently, which is the good behavior reward, bad behavior punishment. That happens a lot as well. So throughout our lives, in a way to be disciplined and in a way for our caregivers to discipline us, they will scold us. And when we are scolded, these splits occur. For example, if a child was angry and they showed their anger in that moment, and that was not acceptable by their caregivers in that moment, then they would get scolded. And in the same way, that part of them that is angry would get rejected. That split would occur, and I would reject that anger that I have in myself, and I would put it in my subconscious, because I've learned that being angry doesn't get me that connection that I want. And this is where self-rejection comes in, and this is where self-hate comes in as well, because we hate those parts of us that are rejecting us to have what we biologically require and biologically need, which is that connection in order to survive. Now, the most healthy, this is actually a very normal way a human being works. We are built like this and we work like this because this is how we survive. Now, in the best scenario to be brought up emotionally by a caregiver, if you were brought up in the best emotional way, you're talking in your adulthood, you would have a minimum of 25 or 30 splits in the consciousness, 30 different splits of aspects. For someone who's had an alright upbringing, not necessarily super healthy in the emotional side, you're talking hundreds. But most of us, especially people that would intentionally look for help, necessarily like maybe be on a MeetUp group and look for that help, you're talking thousands and thousands of splits in your consciousness where we have these aspects. Your entire personality is an amalgamation of all of these aspects that you've taken on that keep you safe. This is essentially what the ego is. Everyone talks about the ego and gives the ego a really, really bad rep. The ego isn't a singular thing. The ego is a behavior that all of these aspects have. These aspects try to figure out the quickest way to keep you safe. For example, the example that I used, the quickest way to keep me safe is not to be vulnerable anymore and not to show myself artistically anymore. And this is where it's like, well, the ego's doing that. It's like, yeah, well, the ego learned that that's how I stay safe. So that's the thing that I adopted. Now, what we would need to do, the goal for this, is to heal these aspects of us. And we would do that through shadow work, essentially. And there's different types of ways of healing these aspects. Learn to give these needs and wants and desires that these aspects have. Get to a place where we can reintegrate these aspects, which is essentially undoing that split in the consciousness. Now, in terms of how to do that, there are different ways of doing it, but essentially, when you feel an emotion, your emotions are a feedback system. Your emotions are trying to get your attention to these aspects. So if I was to put my artistic expression out there, and if I was to feel shame or anxiety or something, that's my being, my mind and body's way of trying to get my attention to look at that aspect in that was, and the split was created in that moment. So that's essentially what we would need to do, is we need to listen to those emotions. We need to listen to those feelings, listen to those emotions. And we would need to go back to understand where that aspect came from, why that aspect feels the way it does. And by using self-love, do the exact opposite of what we've been doing. Because what we do is we try to push these emotions away, push these feelings away, which is very understandable. If I don't know what's going on and I just feel shame, I don't want to feel it, so I'm going to push it away. But this is what we've been doing since the moment of the split, is we've been pushing that aspect of us away. And we have thousands of splits, and we're constantly just pushing all of these aspects away. So the reason we feel the way we do is because there are thousands of aspects trying to get our attention, and we're like, no, 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 no. And sometimes it gets really, really over the top. It gets too much and we can't handle it. It's because we're constantly pushing them away. And what we need to do is we need to get to a place and learn how to accept these aspects with love and bring them in, and listen to the communication that they have, and listen to what they need and provide those needs to the aspects. And this is how we heal those wounds. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to learn more about my teachings, there will be a link to my website in the description, oriensamui.com. I go deeper into the subjects that are the most important part of your healing journey, so you get a much clearer understanding about them. You can also get my meditations and online courses through my website. If you like this video, don't forget to press that subscribe button to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.